Hello and welcome to the Secure World Remote Sessions, our daily digital briefing on cybersecurity. And today we have a fantastic panel discussion that's going to take place on emerging threats, a very timely topic given all that's going on in the digital space and in the real world right now. So thank you for being with us, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, depending on where you are. And I also want to thank, right off the top, our sponsoring partners today, KnowBe4, Tessian, and GuidePoint Security. We really appreciate your support of this kind of digital collaboration and learning. It couldn't happen without you. So know that you three are really appreciated today. Well, a quick note of introduction. My name is Bruce Sussman, and I am Director of Content, and I also host our weekly podcast, the SecureWorld Sessions, which publishes every Tuesday. And under normal circumstances, I'd be traveling to SecureWorld's 17 regional cybersecurity conferences right now that are happening across North America. But instead, I'm at home, just like most of us, right, at home. And last night, as I was preparing for today's panel discussion, I just popped into my head, remembering an interview I did at SecureWorld Twin Cities in Minneapolis. And Jason Whitty, who was our Advisory Council Member of the Year a couple of years ago, he was CISO at US Bank at the time when I interviewed him. Now he's the global CISO at JP Morgan Chase. I think he summed up the cyber threat landscape in a way that really applies to what we're talking about today. And this is his quote: "On planet cybersecurity, there is new weather every quarter, but the old weather, it never goes away." And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. What's the weather like now, and what kind of new weather is coming on the horizon? So really excited to introduce our panelists today. Erich Kron, who is the Security Awareness Advocate for KnowBe4. We have Agent Elvis Chan, who's the Supervisory Special Agent from the FBI San Francisco office. Ed Bishop, who is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Tessian. And Mark Lance, who is the Senior Director of Cyber Defense for GuidePoint Security. And it is just so excellent to have such intelligence in the house today and online with us. So really excited to download some of their knowledge. Now, before we do, I do want to share with you just a few best practices for today. And this answers some of the questions that we often receive. So we call this our Webcaster's Guide to the Conversation. There are some resources available in the resource list, including the most recent FBI crime report. So check that out. That's available for download in the resources tab. If you have questions, and I hope you do, this is designed to be an interactive forum. You can submit the questions in the box on the left side of your screen. If you're looking for a certificate of attendance for your governing body, it will be downloadable after 40 minutes has gone by in the tab that says Certificate of Attendance. Occasionally, you might lose audio for more than a few seconds, or perhaps your video freezes. If that happens, you've probably been on the session and maybe you had it warmed up while you were working prior to the session starting. You just need to hit refresh or F5. That solves about 95% of the problems. And lastly, this is going to be a valuable discussion. And if you want to play it again on demand, you can. We are recording this. You'll just use the original registration link, and it could be a great thing to share with other members of your security team. So those are the best practices. All right, let's get to some opening statements and some introductions by our featured presenters today. And Erich, I've got you kind of at the top left of the screen here. So why don't you kick it off? And if you would, tell us a little bit about your role, a few bullet points, and then give us kind of your opening thoughts on emerging threats.
Yeah, happy to do it, and thanks for having me here. Always a pleasure to start things off. My name is Erich Kron. I'm the Security Awareness Advocate for KnowBe4. At KnowBe4, we do security awareness training and simulated phishing. The whole idea is to kind of train people to make smarter security decisions every day. That's really what we go for. Now, my background, I've worked in all kinds of different industries since about the mid-1990s. I've been in manufacturing. I've been in healthcare. I worked for the DoD. I was the security manager for the 2nd Regional Cyber Center Western Hemisphere for the U.S. Army. And I've worked in, like I said, all kinds of different areas throughout my career. As a security awareness advocate, it's awesome because I get to go around and kind of share some of my experience and things like that with other people, speaking and doing things like this. So it's pretty fantastic. Now, when we talk about emerging threats, that's always an interesting thing because there's a lot of threats. You know, we run around and we say, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And then somebody, bam, drops a pandemic in the middle of everything. And it all just kind of goes off the rails, right? So we have to understand that these are obviously projections and things that we're saying as we think about what's going on right now. Now, in my mind, some of the key things I see as upcoming emerging threats definitely is going to be around continued evolution of social engineering. And I say that because we see things coming up like deep fake technology, the scams. I mean, if you look at what's going on in business email compromise and those sorts of scams, it's just off the charts right now, and they're just making money hand over fist. That's going to be around for a little while, but they're getting really, really good, and they're developing tools for it. So that's the one I'm going to go with.
Okay, well, that is a good one. I think you're right, and that's the thing, developing these new tools to kind of evolve what that social engineering looks like. Thank you, Erich. Excellent introduction. All right, next, let's bring on Ed Bishop. And Ed, why don't you tell us, give us some bullet points about your role in your organization, and then give us your thoughts on emerging threats.
Sure, very happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Bishop. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Tessian. Tessian is a human layer security company that detects advanced threats on email using machine learning. These threats include accidental data loss, data exfiltration, and things like advanced spear phishing or BEC attacks. In my role, I oversee engineering, product, and data science divisions, so very close to the coalface of tackling emerging threats. I guess what I would highlight on the topic of emerging threats is we kind of believe that security has been focused in the last decade on protecting the machine layer. So that's anything kind of device to device. But we believe that the emerging threats are now all about attacking the human layer. So people are vulnerable, they can be deceived, they make mistakes, they're under pressure every single day to do their job. And we just can't expect people to be our security experts. So security technologies need to do a better job at understanding people, their behaviors, their relationships, how they work, to actually begin protecting them against these new advanced emerging threats.
Yeah, that is fantastic, Ed. Yeah, I like that. Really the human layer is really the target of these emerging threats. Excellent. Thank you so much for that introduction and that overview of Tessian. That's great. And now let's go to Supervisory Special Agent Elvis Chan. So Elvis, welcome to the remote sessions.
Thanks for having me, Bruce. So my name's Elvis Chan. I supervise one of the cyber squads for FBI San Francisco. My squad focuses primarily on advanced persistent threats of the Russian persuasion. We indicted the FSB officers who were responsible for the Yahoo breach in 2014. We were one of the field offices who worked on the investigation of the hack of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, DCCC, in 2016. As you can imagine, we were very busy in 2018 helping to secure the midterms, and most of my focus right now is to provide election security as we head into the general election. Still, there's a few primaries out there, but COVID-19 has slowed them down a little bit. I think I echo what the gentleman before me said about emerging threats. I agree with them wholeheartedly. I want to focus specific on the human layer. I think the emerging vulnerability we're seeing is the increased amount of telework. So all of the different ways that people are teleworking, as someone else previously mentioned, going through their personal devices, lots more video conferencing. Zoom bombing is like now a term that I would not have heard even 4 weeks ago. So unfortunately, we've had to handle that sort of situation. So as you can imagine, every FBI office, especially all the cyber squads, are quite busy right now.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Yeah, you're right about Zoom bombing. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I guess what happens in the real world influences what happens in cyberspace, and that was a perfect example of it. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, welcome, and thank you, Elvis, for that introduction. And now let's bring on Mark Lance from GuidePoint Security. Mark, welcome to the remote sessions.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to join the panel. Yeah, so just some quick background. I've been in information security for roughly 20 years. Currently I'm working at GuidePoint, responsible for the cyber defense practice, which involves performing reactive incident response, proactive threat discovery, providing IR retainer services, and other sorts of advisory and proactive services. So in that role we get to see everything from targeted attack activity involving nation state sponsored actors all the way to the most recent ransomware variants. Again, analyst background, spent my time 20 years ago growing up in a SOC, doing shift work. And so in regards to emerging threats, I'd say over that time have been around and seen different motivations behind threats. I mean, in the early days of worms that were self-propagating, there was kind of a lack of motivation in some of those instances that were, very easily to define. But nowadays, I think, obviously it can be broken up more often than not into areas of, access to data and information associated with, intellectual property, monetary gain, or, personal benefits and activism reasons. And I think regardless of what the motivations are that we're seeing across the different actors, I think, fully agree with the rest of the panelists that, it has a tendency to be associated with, bad hygiene and vulnerabilities in human error. And so, ultimately, I think, over the past 20 years, regardless of the threat, we still continue to see that, you can take advantage of the vulnerability in humans to click links or social engineer them in order to progress your motivations. And so I think, again, we see the increase in sophistication of the techniques that are being used once somebody has gained access. But again, I think it's a continued evolution in the sophistication of the ways that they're using humans to get what they want and drive their motivations.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Mark. Thank you for that overview and just the idea that, hygiene obviously continues to still be an issue, and so does, attacking humans, right? That's a great point of entry. So thank you, everyone, for the fantastic introductions. And now, audience, it's your turn to share a little bit about where you're coming from on emerging threats. And so pick one of these choices, or you can actually pick more than one. This is multiple choice. How do you tend to view emerging threats? How do you tend to view emerging threats? They seem to change based on what can make cybercriminals money, or they change based on geopolitical events, or they change based on newly discovered vulnerabilities, or they change based on technological advancement like AI and encryption. So it's only one choice, actually. My apologies. So check out and see which one of these do you think most drives emerging threats in your opinion. And what we'll do is I'll give you just a couple of seconds to answer. We'll take a look at the answer and your responses. And then we're going to dive into some questions that have already been submitted with registration. And I do see some other questions coming in, so we'll work those in as we go through today's discussion. So thank you. Keep those questions coming. And now let's take a look at the results to our first poll question. And here it is. How do you tend to view emerging threats? Now, the majority say based on what cyber criminals can make money from, right? And we know that's a driving factor for a lot of groups, for sure. The geopolitical events, I mean, gosh, the Zoom bombing kind of ties into that, right? It just happened. The change is based on newly discovered vulnerabilities. That's our second most popular answer. And that, I think, goes back to the hygiene issue, because some of those newly discovered vulnerabilities are being exploited years later, right? We've seen that. So really great overview. Thank you very much. Some of you know that, technological advancements can open some holes as well and give some opportunities there. And we're going to cover some of these things as we go through today's discussion. So let's begin now, and let's hit our panel up with our first question that was submitted earlier. And here it is. What do you see as new or growing security vulnerabilities in the rush to work remotely? And this is certainly a timely question. And I was going to ask Mark, since you were the final person to give the introduction, would you maybe tackle this one first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the transition to remote work is definitely going to open up a significant amount of vulnerability. Because ultimately, now that people are working from home, they can change the level of visibility that an organization has, because there are a lot of things that are now out of the control of the organization that an employee would work for. When they're, locally on site, obviously they can ensure that they're connecting to their network. They can ensure that their network perimeter is secured. They can ensure that they're using a business-owned device. With a lot of people working from home, I think what you're doing is, obviously opening up opportunity to exploit, other methods to get access to the individual system and then subsequently into the larger parent organization. Because you have no ability to define what the security controls are to the internet connection that they're leveraging necessarily. Depending upon the configuration of the tools that you have within the environment, you could be allowing, split tunnel, and that is something hopefully they would have control over, but split tunnel VPN where to ensure that, you're not using all and leveraging all the bandwidth, since you've got a large remote worker now. Now you don't have the visibility that you did before into all traffic entering or leaving the individual systems. And I think we're also hearing a lot about people who want to leverage their personal systems for home use, even though they've been given, an organizational laptop or system that they can use to leverage the environment. And so, again, without having, the controls on this kind of bring your own device, systems, it just opens that up to potential vulnerability as well.
Yeah, that's very true, and fantastic description and answer to that question. Does anybody else want to tag on to what Mark had to say?
Hey, so this is Eric, and I'll throw out there 3 letters, in my opinion, to this. And those 3 letters are R, D, and P. RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. That's what people are going to be, and have been opening in this rush to get out there and work from home, right? Shodan.io saw a huge increase in the number of RDP, open RDP sessions or ports out there. And people think they're clever by moving to 3388. You're not. Unfortunately, the bad guys know that. But this has been huge, as we quickly had to move into this work from home thing. A lot of people were not equipped to take their work PCs home. And so what did they do? They did the next best thing. They open up RDP to the internet, they log in from home, and then work on that. But I think that's going to be a big issue. And we've already seen RDP being exploited so much just in the past. I think this is going to be an interesting time for that.
Yeah, very interesting. And I've definitely seen advisories on RDP specifically. I think one of them even came from the FBI, or it might have been CISA. But anyway, it's interesting. Okay, good, Eric. Ed or Elvis, anything to tag onto this before we move on? All right.
This is Ed.
Let's move.
Oh,
What's that?
Sorry. Carry on.
Okay.
I was just going to say.
Did you want to say something,
yeah.
Ed?
Yeah, I was just going to chip in and just say, with the work from home, I think it's just really important to highlight how much of a change this is for the individuals as well. It's not just about the technology. Like, people's lives have been turned upside down and everything is like super uncertain. And what we're seeing is people are just trying to take advantage of that with COVID-19 related attacks. They're specifically targeting that uncertainty and the fact that people's technology stacks are changing and that they're expecting to get emails about new video conferencing or VPN software. And I just think it's important to bring it back to thinking about the people and the end users, and not just, focusing on the technology. And really, this is where we're going to start seeing security vulnerabilities. People just, attacking that uncertainty and taking advantage of it.
That's a great point. And I just think about, it's overwhelming, right, for a lot of people who suddenly are finding themselves as an end user working remotely when they weren't expecting to, and they're trying to do their job. And yes, you're right. That's a perfect example, Ed. You're expecting these kinds of communications, and maybe you're a little distracted in the process with everything else that's going on, and one click and there you go, you're a victim. So that's a very good point to think about the people. All right, let's move on to the next question. And speaking of, attacks coming to people personally, I think there's been a huge uptick in phishing that most of us have probably read about this. And this is this person's question: why has there been such a major jump in phishing during this time? And Erich, do you want to maybe jump in on this one to kick off the discussion?
Certainly. I'll plant the seeds on this one for sure. The deal, I think, is phishing is a social engineering attack, and social engineering attacks rely on human emotions. So they get emotions stirred up and they cause us to kind of cloud our judgment and to essentially fail to apply critical thinking steps. If you look at phishing, that's really what it is. There's always that sense of urgency. There's oftentimes a sense of fear or something like, along with that. And I think because everybody is so, they're fearful right now, there's chaos all around. Policies and procedures don't necessarily match what's going on as we've made this rush to work from home. The bad guys are taking advantage of this turmoil to get people even more riled up. And I'm sure I'll let someone else talk about some of the topics we've seen around like the COVID stuff. But a lot of them tend to be attacking that time of fear, whether it's because people are out of work or they're struggling financially because of this, et cetera, they're furloughed. We're seeing a lot of attacks that are based on that. And so I really think it's because of this chaos and this turmoil and the emotional state that people are in, that's why it's happening so much right now.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's fantastic. Anybody else want to tag on to what Erich had to say?
This is Elvis. I completely agree with Erich. I think another component of this is people are just home more, right? And unfortunately, if you're not binge watching Tiger King on Netflix, you're probably on your phone or on your laptop doing work. And so I think the bad guys, who are both here domestically and overseas, know that people are on their devices more, so they're going to make a concerted effort to hit on all the different themes that Erich had mentioned. I mean, most of them are COVID-19 related. So I just want to
okay. Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear you say that, because we have some question coming up, actually, Elvis, about the themes that you're seeing. So interested to hear about that in a minute. Let's move on to our next question right now, because it is related to this one, because it's about email. What do you see as current or emerging human-caused security risks on email? And let's see, Ed, would you be willing to start us off on this one?
Yeah, sure. Happy to take this. So, I mean, we're seeing a lot of emerging threats. I actually think it's interesting because I think maybe a lot of these threats have existed for a long time, and it's just been considered, the cost of doing email. And, if you want to send email, you need to open yourself up to phishing attacks. You need to open yourself up to data exfiltration, et cetera. And it's only recently, in the last kind of 5 years, that we've been starting thinking about this as a real threat. And then we're seeing these threats get more and more advanced, and hence why I think we're seeing the emergence of the term. We're seeing the emergence of the term emerging. So yeah, I think we break it down into how to think about emerging and new threats is like, it's all about, again, it's about this human layer. So people make mistakes on email. So that means you can basically just accidentally send an email to absolutely anyone with very sensitive information. That's one of the #1 reported data incidents to Information Commissioner's Office in the UK. People break the rules. This is all around kind of data exfiltration. It's about doing things on email that they're not supposed to do. And then finally, what we've just been discussing is people can get tricked and deceived. And we're seeing this a lot with COVID-19 attacks. But specifically, this is all about human layer problems. So it's about understanding how people work. It's about understanding their behaviors. It's understanding their historical email data sets. Really is the only way that you can actually go about starting to tackle these emerging trends. We believe that kind of rule-based technologies play a good job at tackling kind of standard threats, but for the emerging threats, the advanced threats that we're seeing today, you really need to take a different approach. And that's about understanding people, understanding their data points, and really using and leveraging technologies like machine learning to be able to tackle these advanced threats.
Yeah, so using an advanced technology like machine learning to tackle these advanced threats. That's great, Ed. Okay, really appreciate that. Anybody else want to chime in on this question?
Hey, this is Erich again. One of the things that I see going on here a lot, or being a definite risk right now is things like business email compromise and wire transfer fraud. And I say that because a lot of organizations' policies and procedures around, say, money transfer and things like that, we're going to find that a lot of places did not account for this type of a change in their business continuity planning. And so a lot of policies and procedures are being bent or rewritten on the fly. And this is a prime time when communication is sketchy, where when you're in the office, you can always pick up the phone and call somebody. It's not working that way right now. And so I think business email compromise and wire transfer sorts of things are a pretty big threat right now with respect to people.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, this is Mark. I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think that, with the transition to, remote work, there's a lot more being done via email at this point in time, because that's how people are effectively communicating when, obviously email has been something that has been leveraged, historically, regardless of remote or, on premises. But I think there's more of a reliance for it on communication at this point. And I think due to that as well is, to Eric's point, is that there is a change in the policy and the ways that people are using systems. I think, a lot of customers' internal policies were built out on how to access certain systems, what emails should be communicated, and what processes to follow, based on, a local workforce. And now that you have everybody working remotely, I think they're compromising some of those policies and leveraging, email as well as, remote user systems when potentially they weren't doing that historically. And now that opens up potential access, to that data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point on some of the bending of rules, or maybe you kind of just forget because you just need to get the job done or something like that. Yeah, great, Mark. Good point. Thank you. All right, let's go to the next question. And this is a question that I think, Elvis, this would be for you. What types of COVID-19 themed cyber threats is the FBI seeing during this pandemic? And you've listed off quite a historic background you have working on cyber threats and headline grabbing cases. What are you seeing around COVID-19 right now?
So there are broadly 3 different buckets that the FBI is looking at right now. I think the first one is all the fake apps that are out there. So South Korea, the government of South Korea, they did a fantastic job. They have apps, that their citizens install, and so they can notify. If someone tested positive for COVID-19, it will know like all the people that they either talked to or were in close proximity to, and then give them an alert as well, right? So unfortunately, the bad guys are taking advantage of this. We don't actually have this app in the U.S., so any app that anyone would want to get from the Google store or the Apple store, it's fake, right? Like, do not load it on, because you're loading on an app and it's probably either stealing your data. It may be scraping all of the information on your phone, or it may be installing an RDP session. It may be doing all of these things. Lots of fake apps around COVID-19. That's number one. Number two, it's kind of been touched on before, is the increased amount of phishing. So all of the different COVID-19 themes that you can possibly imagine. So some of them involve like, hey, you can click here to get your stimulus check. Hey, please donate money to us, and like click on this link to donate money to us. All of those are probably stealing your credentials or getting access to either your smartphone or your laptop. Or they may also be business email compromises, right? Like, hey, you can send money this way or that way. All of those are very big scams. And then last but not least, associated with the phishing are all of the different fake websites, right? So there are lots of different fake websites now. The phishing emails may direct you to these websites, but fake CDC websites, lots of different spoofed CDC websites. Actually, a lot of the different pharmaceutical companies and bio companies right now, there's a lot of different spoof sites of theirs, people trying to pretend to be all of these companies so that you can order your, N95 face mask and all the other types of equipment that you might want, gloves or anything like that. You think you're doing a good job, but then you end up going to the scam site and they take your money and you get nothing, or you give them your credit card and then they max it out and then you're out whatever the $2,400 that the government just sent you. So those are the three broad buckets that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, that thank you for that bucket view, because that really helps us kind of see the different categories you're talking about. And as you were talking about the last one and all these COVID-19 sites, Elvis, it reminds me of a story that I did on the U.S. Department of Justice, and it was based on an FBI investigation into a site that was selling the vaccine, the WHO vaccine for COVID-19, which of course doesn't exist. And the vaccine was free. You just had to pay $4.95 in shipping with your credit card. So, and the DOJ shut that down after your group's investigation. So, yeah, that's fantastic. Keep up the good work. And it also reminds me of a podcast interview I did not too long ago, just a couple of episodes ago, with the gentleman who discovered a sophisticated spear phishing attack against the World Health Organization. And he also tracks URL registrations, and said right now there are about 2,500 either COVID or coronavirus URLs being registered every single day. So that plays into your third bucket there. So that's great. Anybody else want to chime into this? Otherwise, I'd like to move on to a question about artificial intelligence.
Well, hey, this is Eric. I just want to throw a couple numbers out here real quick at you to show. We were tracking like the new types of COVID-related phishing templates that we were seeing here. And from March 8th to the 14th, we saw 16 brand new phishing templates that the bad guys were using. From the 15th through the 21st, it jumped to 36. But get this, from March 22nd to the 28th, there were 94 brand new phishing templates the bad guys were using just in that period of time, to give you an idea how fast that's jumping.
Wow, that is incredible context there. They're not wasting any time capitalizing on this. Was somebody else trying to jump in as well?
Yeah, this is Mark. I was just going to say, I think it's important to note that this really all goes back to the same theme, where it is, attackers are going to take advantage of any situation that they have available. And, all of the things that were mentioned, include attempts at social engineering and taking advantage of the human vulnerability, whether it's from the apps, test kits trying to be sold, or sites that they're getting people to go to. Each of these is still taking advantage of those, that same theme, which is, the vulnerability in humans.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Mark. Good perspective. Okay, excellent. All right, well, let's move on to our next question. And this is related to artificial intelligence. And this is a question that is often discussed at SecureWorld conferences. And I'm always fascinated to go to these sessions. It's basically like, what role will artificial intelligence play in cybersecurity? And it seems like everybody's grasping for answers on that one. And this person continued, any ideas on how criminals also may use AI? So let's see, Eric, would you want to take a stab at this one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned this kind of during my intro. If you've heard of deep fakes, that's where you can take essentially videos and replace faces on those. There's also ways to do it with audio. And most of the tools that are running these days are AI based. A lot of them run off the Google TensorFlow platform. But these are being used to do some of these tasks in order to set things up to essentially fool people with these really, really well done fakes. I mean, it can be done for good too. I actually saw a train video of, it was like in the 1800s they redid with AI, and it looked beautiful. But we're seeing this on the offensive side as well. Now, the defense to this is deploying the same sorts of tools to detect the changes that happen within the files as they create them, as the AI creates them. There are things like with the voice, how we as humans can put together sounds that the AI will put together that isn't natural. In other words, your tongue can't be in these two places that quickly, so we make another sound to mimic it. And so it's being used on the defensive side as well. But I think that's what we're going to see, is we're going to see kind of a whack-a-mole of AI on offense and defense here as we move forward. We're going to see the bad guys deploying it. We're going to see the good guys deploying it to counter the bad guys, et cetera, et cetera.
I like that, the whack-a-mole of AI and offense and defense. I can picture that, actually. Very, very good, Eric. Anybody else want to chime in on artificial intelligence?
This is Ed jumping in. Tessian obviously is a machine learning company on the defense side, so we think there's a huge role to play for AI in detecting some of these emerging threats. If we just bring it back to kind of, I guess, which is one of the core topics of this panel is bringing it back to email. I would say that there's just so much work still to be done on the defense side that attackers don't even need to be thinking about AI on the offense side. It is quite frankly far, far too easy to send very convincing impersonation emails, taking advantage of COVID-19 and just bypass existing technologies and get straight to the end user to take advantage of those human vulnerabilities and social engineering. So although we're seeing very interesting things, I think deepfakes is a great example of where it's truly being used on the offensive side. If we take it back to email, where 91% of all cyber attacks originate, I think we're going to see a lot of work on the defense side, where attackers can just be using really simple phishing kits to bypass existing solutions.
Interesting. And so that's why we have to have the machine learning and AI on defense. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. I think the legacy approach to tackling things like phishing and BC is really predominantly like blacklist based, where you have to assume the attack in a number of accounts or using basic heuristics or rules. And quite frankly, as soon as you introduce rules, people are going to break those rules, right? Rules are made to be broken, and attackers are constantly playing this game of cat and mouse. So yeah, it's all about defense. It's understanding people. It's understanding how they operate, what normal looks like for those end users, and training machine learning models then that can detect people sending advanced impersonation emails.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, thank you for kind of painting that picture. That's very easy to understand. Great, Ed. All right, Mark or Elvis, did you want to chime in on AI, or we're moving to another futuristic question next? So speak now or forever hold your peace.
Yeah, I think this is Mark. This is Mark. I would say, we'll continue to see attackers use it for malicious purposes, especially from a malware perspective, where they can build in basically functionality that, based on knowledge of a customer environment, based on, how many users have, accessed an application, based on, certain time frames and time limits, at those points in time, certain things can be executed or certain evasive techniques can be used. I mean, we've already seen malware, that it's obviously, VM aware, and we'll continue to see the evolution of those malicious attack techniques that are going to have the purposes of evading visibility and doing, time-related or kind of variable-related releases of, into and injects into systems.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, thank you for explaining that and illustrating that and what we've been seeing and how that informs what's coming down the pike. Appreciate that, Mark. All right, let's go to our next question. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one, but it is a question that it does pop up from time to time as people say things like this. And here's the question. I keep hearing more and more about quantum computing. Is this something we really need to worry about anytime soon? This has been talked about in security circles for several years now. Kind of comes in waves, it seems like. Erich, you want to take a stab at this one? What do you think?
Yeah, I will be the first to admit I am not a quantum expert. However, in my normal work job, I sit next to someone who is a quantum expert, and I've kind of picked it up a little bit, through osmosis from Roger Grimes. He just wrote a book on quantum and how this is going to affect things. Frankly, I think there are two things we have to worry about with quantum. Number one, I do believe, based on the research I've seen and I've heard, that we're going to reach quantum supremacy. We're going to reach that quantum break where it's going to impact how passwords and things are encrypted very, very soon. If we haven't already, there's some talk saying that we've already reached that, which is why some of this stuff has gone very quiet recently. And then the flip side to that, though, the other part that I think is probably the more pressing and the stuff that's going to actually be more of an issue is the snake oil around quantum. So people saying that they have these, there was someone at, I believe it was at RSA, said they had a backpack-sized quantum computer, which is completely out of the question right now. The thing was, it was actually a quantum emulator, right? And so there's differences there, but they're not necessarily being real clear about that. So I think because of the way that it's being marketed and the way that, everyone's looking for this thing, I think there's a lot of snake oil that we're going to see out there before we really do see the real thing happening.
Yeah, and interesting on that, Eric, what you saw at RSA, were they giving that away in a raffle? That was, I missed that one if they were.
No, actually, last I heard, it hadn't even shown up at the conference yet. They were having some problems getting it shipped there. Yeah, I'm like, okay, whatever. But it was interesting because we were kind of looking for that one. And then when you actually started peeling back the layers, that's all it was a quantum emulator.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Okay. That's great. All right. Thanks for that perspective. That's good. This is a ballpark that. I like that. All right. Let's go to our next question. And this is something that a lot of organizations are concerned with now. I watched the nuclear ransomware webcast last week. And just for background, nuclear ransomware is where data is being exfiltrated and then there's extortion involved. If you don't want us to publish it, then pay up, right? So it adds another layer to ransomware. It's the nuclear version. So the question here is, has the panel seen an increase in this type of digital extortion? And I think for this one, Elvis, would you be willing to go first on this and tell us what you're seeing and thinking from the FBI standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. So unfortunately, in the old days, I used to say ransomware knows no one single industry. Like I would say previously that broadly all industries, it's equal opportunity. As we previously have mentioned, cybercriminals are very opportunistic. Right now, I would actually adjust what I said. Really worried about the healthcare sector right now, both from the hospital, medical equipment providers, research, pharmaceutical companies, like that's a really big area right now. And the reason it is because the bad guys know, hey, like there's emails flying around all over the place. So if you can imagine like UCSF Hospital, I'm just using that as an example, but like they're trying to communicate with the other UC hospitals, or they're trying to communicate with folks out in Sacramento. And so public health officials who may not usually be talking to each other are now talking to each other. Well, you have bad guys who are impersonating public health officials from other places, or impersonating a CDC official, or impersonating someone from the WHO. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of growth, unfortunately, right now. And if you can imagine, right, like so. These are primarily through emails. I think Ed had mentioned that. Yeah, like I would say upwards of 80, maybe close to 90% of the time we see ransomware is delivered through an email, right? There's a link or an attachment that you click on. And so if you can imagine like a hospital or, a medical provider that makes, masks or other PPE, and they've just been ransomware and said, we're going to like scatter all of your customers' data on the web if you do not pay us this. There is some heightened tension. So unfortunately, I've seen through the news that there are a lot of these types of organizations getting hit and paying the ransom. And the FBI definitely says do not pay the ransom. And the reason for that is most of the time it's a sucker bet. Based on my own experience, about 1 out of every 4 times you pay the ransom, you actually get the key to unlock your data. And the problem is it was encrypted, right? So even if they give you the key to decrypt it, your data could be corrupted or jacked up in some way anyway. So better to spend that money on hiring some of these folks here, from the other organizations that I'm speaking with, to be able to help you with your incident response, to be able to help with all of that. So
yeah, that is an interesting point, Elvis. I appreciate you bringing that up. The idea that somehow you pay the ransom and problem solved. It's still a long road to go down once you pay that ransom and hopefully get the decryption key. So we've heard plenty of stories about that. Okay, anyone else want to tag on before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, this is Mark. I mean, I would definitely agree. I mean, we are seeing a substantial increase in this, from the response perspective. I mean, I think kind of touched on, earlier, during the discussions, is we are seeing, kind of an evolution of the criminal organizations leveraging ransomware because, initially it started out as Elvis was saying, very opportunistic, shotgun approach, hit a couple systems, see if you can get somebody to pay the ransom. What they found is that, if they target specific organizations, there's going to be a higher payout for those organizations. So we saw them start transitioning to targeted attack techniques where they're actually, leveraging certain, similar techniques to those of, a nation state or an advanced attacker, where instead of just spraying multiple people with email, you're now getting access into a corporate environment and then moving into that environment, establishing persistence mechanisms and encrypting specific systems and asking for a ransom in order to get that paid. Well, they found then that people are not paying those ransoms. And so ultimately they're like, well, what can we do to further sophisticate and increase the likelihood that we'll get paid? Well, now we're going to start, exfilling data and retaining some of their information so we can start blackmailing people to ensure that they are going to pay these ransoms. So again, it's just further sophistication of these criminal attack groups to ensure that they're going to, monetize their activities and get paid for what they're doing. And as, we continue to evolve to respond to them, they're coming up with newer ways to ensure that they're going to, again, get paid for their activities. And that's where I think we've seen this evolution, and we have considered to see it more, lately, and I think we will continue to do so.
Yeah, interesting. And that is a case in point, right, of an emerging threat. That's a fantastic way of describing that. Let's move on to our next question in the interest of time. Are insider threats becoming more of a danger with the pandemic? And actually, I know you just got done talking, Mark, but during our prep time, this was something that you had interest in. What are you seeing as far as the risk here and what's driving it?
Yeah, I think that ultimately, and it's going to come down to just the mass amount of people that you're seeing, laid off or furloughed. Say, you have, 50 people that you lay off per year, and of those, you have, 2 or 3 instances of insider threat where they're trying to steal data or take data because they're leaving the company and they want to make sure that they have, stuff for resumes, contact lists, whatever it is. And so I think, now that you're laying off larger or furloughing larger amounts of people, well, if it was only, 1 out of 50, but now you're doing 500, well, it's obviously going up exponentially to meet that amount. And so I think you're going to have more and more instances of that. Now, that being said, I think that there's also, just larger potential for people considering doing it because, the change in visibility and lack of visibility with people leveraging home systems. I think that, now that you're on a home system, again, who knows what sort of VPN technology people are using, what sort of endpoint solutions they have deployed, if they're using, their own devices versus organizational devices, it just increases the chance that, somebody could perform those activities and reduces their risk of getting caught.
Yeah, very interesting, all those different points. Thank you. And Ed, did you have something you wanted to chime in on this topic?
Yeah, we have I think that's a great point that's been mentioned. Obviously, data exfiltration is obviously painted with quite a negative kind of brush, and rightly so. But data exfiltration also covers people who aren't necessarily being malicious, but they're just trying to do their job and accidentally essentially breaking their IT policy. So, to give you an example, you're working from home. How are you going to print something? Are you going to go through the headache of trying to set up your home printer with your work computer, even though USBs are disabled, Bluetooth's disabled? No, what you're probably going to do is you're just going to forward that email to your Freemail account, go onto your personal device and print it. You've just exfiltrated data. Your data has maybe traveled to another jurisdiction due to that event. So we just are seeing a trend of not necessarily malicious data exfiltration, but definitely an increase in data exfiltration. But just because people are trying to do their jobs effectively and their workforce haven't provided them with the technology to do that, so they're always going to just go to the path of least resistance, which is often exfiltrate data to their personal email accounts.
Yeah, well, that is interesting. In fact, I was having a conversation with a neighbor who said that he was having trouble logging on to his corporate server through the VPN and all this, now that he's working remotely. And he said, so my colleagues and I, we just went ahead and we set up Google Docs. And so that's how we're sharing things. And I thought, oh, I hope your security team doesn't find out about this because they would not like it. So that's a great point, Ed, on just all the different ways. The printing was another great example of that. Okay, next question. Do you see things getting more normal, quote unquote, when people return to working in the office, assuming that we do at some point? Erich, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, I think this is going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I know I've already decided I'm going to go tape a thing on the floor 6 feet from my door. Hopefully, we'll keep trying to go through that social distancing thing. It's just far enough we can't knock. But no, I think normal is definitely going to have to reestablish itself. One of the things I see happening here is when we return back to work, there's still going to be a lot of things we put in place. For example, we talked about, RDP earlier, VPN connections and stuff that were kind of thrown up to get people working while they're home by the IT folks, or maybe permissions were granted. And I think it's going to be interesting to see when people go back to work, how is that going to change? Any of us that have been practitioners have been in the stand where we've thrown any permissions at something just to get the thing to work, right? And then you forget to go back and remove these permissions later. I think we're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff. I think a lot of organizations that have been hesitant to allow people to work from home in the past for whatever reason may realize that there can actually be benefits to that as well if they do well doing this. So it may force some people to go, maybe brick and mortar offices aren't necessarily the way to go. It won't just be the startups and the millennial companies that are doing that.
Yeah, I've heard talk about that for sure. And I'm sure everybody is going to be looking at that. And think of the money you could save if you were occupying 3 floors of a building in downtown New York or San Francisco if you could work remotely. Wow, that could be a lot of money saved. Okay, in the interest of time, let's go on to the next question. There are plenty of examples where traditional cybersecurity methods prove ineffective. Why is this, and will attackers always be a step ahead? And I like that second part of the question too, because you do hear that it's a cat and mouse game, but it seems like the attackers, why are they always the ones ahead? Ed, would you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great point. Like, why does it always feel like they're a step ahead? Remember, I think we always try and think of it at Tessian as like it's a numbers game. For the attacker, they can send 1,000 emails, and they only need one email, for you to click that link, for you to wire that money. So although you hear about the one, don't forget that they probably sent 9,999 other emails that weren't successful. But the point is all they need is one email to be successful. And that's why you will always hear about data breaches in the news and in the press. I think, bringing it back to why traditional cybersecurity methods are ineffective, it really just comes down to this. Yeah, it's a game of cat and mouse. Put yourself in the shoes of the attacker. If I can go onto a security vendor's website and go onto their wiki and how-to, and see that there are rule-based, how to set up policies that are rule-based, what are the attackers going to do? Well, they're going to send an attack that just flies past those rules because we've just gone and exposed what that technology is looking for and how they can prevent it. So anything that's rule-based, it can definitely provide a job against basic attacks that don't change, that aren't in flux. But anything which is against human vulnerabilities, against the human layer, you're going to just be in this game of cat and mouse. I just also highlight that another kind of, traditional cybersecurity method, which is effective to some degree, is training and awareness. But I think far too many companies rely on that as a silver bullet. And again, attackers know this. So they know what people are trained against. They know the types of threats that people are trained against. But there are just such sophisticated attacks out there that we cannot rely on people to detect. We need technology to do a better job and really understand kind of what normal looks like and be able to spot those anomalies.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Ed, very much for describing that whole situation. Does anybody else, have anything to say? And actually, Ed, I'll let that be your closing comment. How about Erich next? Do you have a closing comment on this emerging threats area? And then we'll go to Mark, and we'll follow that up with Elvis. What do you say? Just a quick closing comment here.
Yeah, I agree with some of the things that Ed just said. I do believe that, honestly, the training piece is important. I do think we have to have layers. Don't get me wrong. We have to have layers. I think the reason that the training piece doesn't work as often as perhaps it can is because sometimes we have very technical people training very non-technical people. And so that's just a recipe for disaster right there, right? Put me in front of the accounting team and see how that goes. So I think the training has to be right, but I do agree that we need the layers. Okay. If you look, we mentioned sending, 1,000 emails. Last time I looked, I could send 50,000 phishing emails for $65 on the dark web, right? It's a numbers game. It absolutely is a numbers game. And we need defense in depth. That's what it takes, is reducing your risk at the different layers, because there is no silver bullet. Whether it's ML, whether it's AI, whether it's all of these cool technology things we have going on, there is no one silver bullet. It has to be a layered approach done smartly to reduce your amount of risk at the different layers.
Fantastic. Okay, appreciate that overview. Thank you on that layered approach. Let's go to Mark now for your closing thoughts. What do you say, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great way to summarize it because, ultimately we are talking again, about evolution of cybersecurity methods. And I think it's to the other panelist's point, it's a combination of various things. We've got to have, the technology that provides visibility. You've got to have people who can effectively leverage that technology. You've got to have end users who know what to do around education, and we've got to have, sufficient process to support all of that. And I think, regardless of all of those pieces, there is no one silver bullet. It is a combination of all of those working factors that really have to be working together efficiently to be able to address, a majority of threats. And even in those situations, there is still just the slightest potential for, human error or advantages, that are being released in other ways for the attackers that they're always going to take advantage of and leverage. Now, yes, we are always proactive in thinking of ways and things that they could start leveraging and doing and trying to be preventative for those. But, they're very innovative and they're going to continue to find ways to take advantage of people when there's not other ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very innovative. I agree. That's a good point. Thank you very much, Mark. Elvis, what about a closing statement from you?
I think all the fine gentlemen have made conclusion remarks really well. I would just like to give a plug. If you see something, you should say something. And you can report this to the FBI through our website, ic3.gov. The letter I, the letter C, the number 3.gov. And so there's always someone there 24/7. So if you were the victim of a business email compromise or anything else, you can report all of this to the FBI through that website. I would also recommend that if you see scams on any of the social media providers that you the U.S. providers, you should report it to them. The Facebooks, the Googles, YouTubes, all of that. Definitely report it to them. They are paying attention. They are trying to improve their algorithm so that they can detect this type of fraudulent activities going on. But that's my main plug. Thank you.
I think that's fantastic. And just the idea of reporting it and creating awareness within the organizations or the government agencies who are paying attention right now. So really important point. And I want to say thank you, Elvis. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Erich. Really appreciate your expertise and your time with us. I also want to say thank you to KnowBe4 and Tessian and GuidePoint Security. Again, we appreciate your support. Now, one thing that I'm doing when I am not hosting web conferences like this is I'm interviewing security experts on our podcast, which is available on all the major podcast platforms. And our newest episode is about emerging threats. It's about tracking COVID-19 cyber threats specifically. And we spoke to Myla Pilo, and her research team has detected more than 900,000 coronavirus-related threats so far. And I want to play just a brief clip of our interview and why she thinks criminals were so fast to jump on this bandwagon. So listen to this after just a moment of silence. You'll hear the video.
It can be any global issue pertaining to, natural disaster, popular topics, and sadly, crises like this. They will definitely take advantage of it. What I call their interest is really what I call the riding the wave metaphor or the behavior, which means that for them, when they seize this opportunity, they will get maximum exposure with what I call minimal to very little effort because it's already in the news. It's all over. The only thing that they need to do is plug in their attack.
And they're plugging in their attack right now for that prominence. So be sure and check out that podcast episode. It's also in the resources tab. And I want to let you know what's coming up on April 23rd. This is an important panel discussion. The obstacles you'll face with security awareness training in a pandemic. So we're talking about right now, how is the face of security awareness training change? That's coming up on the 23rd. And I do want to let you know about our next daily briefing, our next remote session on security topics. Tomorrow, we're talking about understanding how cyber insurance impacts your incident response planning. Did you know that your insurance may dictate which response organizations you have to use or which remediation service you have to call in? It's really surprising. It's going to be a fascinating presentation tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 Eastern. And then our panel discussion on Monday will be around vulnerability management in today's climate. So just a lot of relevant information. And what we're trying to do is bring the security community together for collaboration. So many of us are in that growth mindset, right? And we can't be together now in the real world, but yes, we can virtually. So thank you for being here today. I do want to let you know that if you're looking for your certificate of attendance, you absolutely can download it now from your certificate of attendance tab. It will be available there. And once again, thanks to KnowBe4, Tessian, and GuidePoint. I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their Thursday, and this does conclude our broadcast.